Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we are proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with peak confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website. That's at peakwm.com. The Professor has his take on what life is like in Bloomington when your football team's a winner. And there's tons of news about rosters, reforms, and regulations. But first, Michigan dropping to 500 on the season, losing to Indiana 20-15. I think people, Greg, have different interpretations on how this game went. Some saw top 10 ranked Indiana as worthy. Some saw them as a fraud. I thought Michigan made some improvements against an IU team that looked vulnerable to the upset, but ultimately Michigan couldn't make enough plays to win.
We'll talk about all that and more. Yeah, I see a little bit of both. I see Michigan had an incredible defensive performance, but being there, it's obviously different, right? You have your perceptions of what happened and how the game played out. And Steve, the vision in my head are balls sailing over Michigan receivers about 20 yards over their heads. That's what I remember on the dome field as I was so close to the field. But a team in Indiana that clearly was wobbling, and the puff chest Signetti with the trick plays and this and that and the dominating offense. If this was a fight, they wobbled a little bit. And gosh, Steve, Michigan had its chances.
They did. It just didn't work out. I thought the defensive effort was incredible against one of the statistically best offenses in the nation. They averaged over 46 points per game going in. Michigan's defense held IU to just 18 yards in the second half, and most of that came on their last drive to kill the clock.
Yeah, and just watching Graham, he's such a warrior, and just watch how teams just try to deal with him and all the other defensive players. Again, down, Will Johnson put up a great effort and really probably did plenty enough for Michigan to win this game, but didn't pull it out.
Look at the defensive side. You had Zeke Berry, who had an interception and back-to-back passes broken up on the next possession in the third quarter. And then TJ Guy, 2 sacks on the same drive. Tyler Morris making an NFL catch for the offense, trying to jumpstart something, but you're just not going to see an overnight transformation in the offense whatsoever.
No, and I talked about the passes, and Davis Warren just didn't have a good game. I was hopeful, as I mentioned last podcast, that, okay, this is a cool story. This is a fun story to watch. Steve, you were skeptical, and that's how it played out. He's QB 2.5 or 3. And that's what we saw out there. And you needed that. You needed it in the red zone, and it didn't happen.
No, he didn't have an interception, didn't take a sack, but the Indiana defense is almost as extraordinary as their offense. They came into the game leading the nation in rush defense. They weren't going to allow Michigan to get into a rhythm that way. The turnover by Alex Orji at midfield and Warren losing the ball on 3rd and goal without even being hit didn't help.
Yeah, and again, plenty of, while he was on the run, and that's not his thing, there were plenty of receivers open and tight ends open, and where you could have just laid the ball in there, and he just couldn't do it.
Just couldn't do it on the run with a little bit of calmness. It's hard to do, by the way, when you're running for your life.
No doubt, and that was a big problem, but we're Michigan. We got to have a quarterback that can make some of those throws, and he just didn't.
And that's why we agree that this is QB 2.5 to QB 3.
You got me there, Steve. My little maize and blue sunglasses. I wanted it not to be, but you are right.
I did not expect Michigan to run the ball at all. Watching this defensive front throughout the course of the season, they have been so disruptive. Mikhail Kamara should be a first-team All-Big Ten player. He came into the game leading the conference in sacks and in tackles for loss. Totally devastated Michigan State the week before, even though Michigan couldn't do anything close to that, penetrating Michigan State's rushing game. But when you talk about the best players in the Big Ten on that defensive line, Kamara is right there at the top. Abdul Carter is probably what most of the people have heard of in the Big Ten, playing for Penn State. Mateo Uiagalelei, DJ's younger brother for Oregon. And Josiah Stewart of Michigan has really done a good job off the edge. But I think Kamara is going to be a first-team defensive lineman.
Yeah, and he's going to earn that or not get that this next week when they play Ohio State, and we'll preview
Right.
the Big Ten because there's some big stuff coming up. But you're absolutely right. We couldn't get it going. And there are a lot of questions about coaching and coaching staff. What did you think, Steve?
For the first time, I thought Sharon wasn't actually eager to go for it on 4th and 1 or 4th and 2. He settled for field goals. He settled for punts. Now, I'm not saying that to bash Sharon, but for a guy who I see as one who likes to gamble as much as Dan Campbell and the Lions do, he was not as confident as he used to be with that running game. And, of course, it didn't help that Gio El-Hadi was injured in the game up front.
Yeah, and we saw early this season our best win, that USC win, where we really relied on Mullings. Mullings just hasn't been that guy the last few games. He's averaging just over a yard a carry, I believe, the last 3 games. I don't believe we saw him in the first quarter. I'm not sure if we got an explanation to that other than Donovan did well in practice. Donovan's never been the short yardage guy, and he was bottled up. He had a couple chances to break away. And then, of course, probably our best, short yardage guy over the last couple of games has been Orji. But that's just straight up too obvious when he's back there, because that's all we're doing with it, save for the one pass he threw. We were all excited that he threw a pass. It wasn't anywhere near to being complete, but he's clearly not a threat. And at this point, everyone knows when Orji's back there what's going to happen.
Right.
So you can't rely on that in 4th down. So we lost that gear.
And they ganged up on him on that first down play and lost the football around midfield. So just can't have it. I don't know what his future is going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. But I want to know your experience down in Bloomington from beginning to end, the places you went, how the stadium felt, because most of the time when you go to Bloomington, you experience a situation where you watch IU people cope with a loss while you experience the same old. They did win during COVID, but the community wasn't allowed to see it. And now that you get to see them celebrate, what did you witness out there?
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk about Indiana, and it's kind of what we saw in the game was where they wobbled a little bit. They dropped some passes, and when they could have really helped. And I see some of that in their fans. And when I say that, yeah, this is clearly a new kind of culture for them. They are getting used to it, how to brag, how to really show up for the game. In fact, my observation, Steve, is that they actually oversell their parking lot because they're not used to having fans fill it. This is legit. When I went to business school there years ago, you used to be able to pull up right to the stadium and park for these games. I'm telling you, right? You just pull right up. And of course, well, what do you mean? Well, Michigan fans, like our stadium areas around the stadium are on lockdown. They are sold. Like everyone has their purpose. It's not like that in Indiana. Their fans were great. I didn't see a ton of Michigan people in the stands. The Michigan section, I think, was behind me. But even out, they're wearing their red and their white. You just didn't see a lot of maize and a lot of blue. They really showed out for this one.
You said something earlier, though, that made me think, were they waiting for the other shoe to drop when things weren't going their way, or did they fully expect that they were going to prevail?
I never sensed like that wild confidence that maybe you see with their basketball program and things like that. This is new territory for them, but they kept cheering, they kept rolling. It's a great town, and I'll tell you, the students have really embraced, and they've always been good tailgaters, but they've really embraced this as well as the whole atmosphere. I told you I went to the steakhouse. I had the reservation. We did that. Kids had crab legs. I met my good buddy there, Lou, from business school. He came in. Pre-game, we went to something called a darty, Steve. Do you know what a darty is?
Something that involves dirty and darts?
It's not so clever. It's a day party. It's basically, and by day I mean morning. My buddy's daughter goes to Indiana, and we went to a sorority/fraternity party at a fraternity house. Absolutely disgusting fraternity house, like you'd expect. You walk through, it smells like beer. And then you go in the backyard, and they have these 30-foot fence, in this fraternity area. And DJ, the whole thing, natural light, of course, being served behind the bar, packed, crowded. Naturally, Steve, some of my students from Michigan, from the competing fraternity, were there.
Really?
So this was fun.
So wait a minute. Some of your students from your class was at the fraternity party.
Yes.
Who was more surprised, you seeing them or them seeing you?
Well, at this point, I'm walking in and I'm maintaining, I'm having a few beers, but these guys, I think, were pretty liquored up. And yes, Steve, it was bear hug and selfies, and what are you doing here? And of course, I'm like, where do you expect me to be? As all like, I go to the hottest things, everywhere. But it was really funny. It was cool to see them.
Some guy is like telling their best friend over the phone and says, dude, I got so drunk in Bloomington. Like when I woke up, I saw my professor.
I think, I was going to say, checks the photos. Wait, Dooley was there? So it was a riot. That was fun. And then we actually went to the south side of the stadium is where the grassy fields and all that stuff are, equivalent of like the south side of our stadium where the golf course is, and just packed with people, Michigan fans out there, but mostly Indiana fans. Definitely fewer Michigan fans than I expected. Great environment. Hung out in the parking lot after. Didn't really get any people snapping at me as Michigan fans. It's not that kind of feel. Overall, pretty respectful. But they showed up. The place was packed.
Well,
this is what to the rafters.
This is what Signetti wanted. When Signetti came in, he chastised the student section for not staying past halftime. They had just broken a school record in terms of scoring points and yards in week number 2. They scored 77, I think, against Western Illinois, the Leathernecks. It was more about him being angry that the fans didn't show up. And so he's had this persona and has now kind of lifted the veil off that persona. And being quite frank, I needed to change the culture around here, and I needed to get angry at people, and I needed to put all the attention on myself, be arrogantly confident. I win, Google me type to draw a whole bunch of attention on him. And I think he's carried it off. And, 10 wins will do that.
It's not apples to apples, but it's clearly something that Dusty May is trying to do with the basketball program by visiting the students, by visiting a fraternity, like saying, we need you, this place is going to be full. He's trying to get that vibe. And, dude, I credit the Indiana fans. They created, it was a party. Yeah, sure, Steve. It got a little quiet there as Michigan kept getting stop after stop, and those last 7 minutes of the game were nail-biters for them. But I love that town, though. I just love it. There's a lot of similarities to Ann Arbor in that town. When you kind of like go concentric circles outside the town, it's very hippie-ish. It's very artsy as you kind of crawl outside town, and then you actually have the town itself right around the people who live there. If you've ever seen the movie Breaking Away, there's those Bloomington people who live there.
That made my pregame show, by the way.
Oh, did it?
Yes,
I love that movie.
I said people in Bloomington are just getting used to the fact that there is life after basketball in the movie Breaking Away.
That's right. That's right. Which I believe won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Steve, you probably know, but a great movie. It was definitely nominated if it didn't win.
The winner is Steve Tessich for Breaking Away.
Dennis Quaid. It's a great movie.
The guy from Kelly, the Bad News Bears.
That's right. He was their fourth biker on their team, on the Little 500 team. It was great. It's a cool place to visit. Definitely want to go back. Want to go back for a hoops game. Great to see. My daughter came into town. My son's down there in Indiana and just had a ball. Ball. Yep. My daughter, some of you know, is in New York City. And we actually had kind of like a Big Ten weekend, like as if she was at Indiana, because she was with me at all the things, and it was a lot of fun. Steve, NIL isn't too far away. They have their collectives. They did QR codes on the big board. They had little testimonials about how you have to support the NIL in the stadium. I was kind of cracking up at that. An overall good job, but for a few reasons, they're just not sophisticated. I don't think they were ready for all the media to be there, Steve. Like the parking situation, right? The ticket people, there were jams at certain things. They're just not ready for all of this attention that I think they get. I'm sure they're reveling in it, right? And they're having a lot of fun with it. But yeah, it was crazy. It was great. And getting out of there, which is probably something never experienced before, it's kind of hard to get in and out of Indiana Stadium unless you're kind of cutting through the town, because there's kind of one road that goes back to the highway, and they don't do the I-94 one direction, the Main Street one direction thing. Like, why would they even conceive such a thing?
Have you been to Penn State?
Well, I have, but remember, Steve, I flew in there on a private jet.
That's right. That's right.
On a PJ.
I forgot about that.
Steve, you wouldn't understand, but it was actually incredibly smooth.
Yeah.
It was incredibly smooth getting in and out of there, as it turns out.
Yes.
I was back at Oscars by 5 p.m. for a noon game.
When you have that type of cachet, yes, I'm sure there's no comparison. But if you're a commoner like myself, I hear things about getting in and out of Penn State is difficult, and now you're telling me it's the same way at IU.
It was pretty bottled up. And again, like at what point did someone, Steve, you might know, at some point someone said, hey, everyone's going to the highway. Why don't we figure out how to shut down Main Street and just have it go directly south for an hour? And someone at some point, and it's impressive what they do, because you have to shut it off at certain points, and they do it like clockwork at Michigan Stadium.
They do.
I'm not saying it's super easy to get out, but it's effective.
It involves a lot of people.
Yeah.
And a lot of cones.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of cones.
All right. Lots of news involving scholarships, rosters, regulations. More things have come out. I have to start eliminating some topics. Otherwise, we could do the whole show on it.
Easily.
But main things.
I could do a whole class on it, as it turns out.
Yeah. Each
28 sessions of class I could do on this.
Amazing.
It's funny.
That's a good idea.
I will say some of the things that are happening bleed into multiple classes, because what we're talking about with all the house settlements, this is history happening before our eyes. Right. So when I have Ward Manuel, and he actually came into the history of college athletics, not the NIL class, but it's because this is history. This is historic. This is shaping the future of college athletics, and it's happening right now. So we have to capture that. So some of my information I share in the classes, and I do have people who take both, it's a slightly different version depending on the class, but it's some of the things we're about to talk about now with what's going on.
And then how you adapt to it shows who's sitting on the sideline and who is expressing and exhibiting leadership. So now you can use that in all three of your classes.
There are, like, Ward Manuel is a guy who he's the kind of person, Carol Hutchins is the kind of person that could speak in my NL class from her perspective and her journey. She's definitely in my history of college athletics class for her journey through Title IX, but has and should be someone who could speak in my leadership class. So there's crossover for sure.
All right. So some of the big news across the country, one of the big things that really, really surprised me.
Yeah, it's surprising.
Football scholarships remaining at 85 in the SEC next year. Wow.
Yeah.
So right before the weekend, that started off with a report out of Auburn that they were not going to expand their football scholarships beyond 85 for next season. And it's important to know that they're not saying for all time in the history of football in the future. Just next season, they're not expanding 85. Well, that quickly turned into the entire Southeastern Conference.
Right. And to be clear, with the ability under the new guidelines we're getting out of the House settlement to take it up to 105. Okay. And that's the roster is set at 105, but also you can bring up scholarships to each one of those 105. So they're saying we're going to keep it where it is.
And I think
85.
that's the surprise, because I think we talked about it as it was going to happen. I think other people did too, that it was just an automatic assumption. Well, if football can get 105, they're going to get 105.
Absolutely.
And the SEC has decided, nope, we are putting a freeze right at 85.
So what were your initial reactions here, Steve? Because I have some takes.
One of surprise and shock, because if you can spend more money in football, I think they were going to do it. They clearly have decided for a year that they're not, that they got everybody to agree to it, that there wasn't somebody that says, oh, no, we'll take the advantage of getting 20 more scholarship players in here. They actually came together as a group and said, all right, we're on board. The other thing that I kind of thought was surprising was that if you're adding 20 men's sports scholarships, that you're going to have to, by law, add 20 women's scholarships,
at least,
which has the women's program head coaches and people thinking, okay, good, we're going to get 20 more. It's somehow going to get divvied up. But I like the fact that we're going to get 20 more. And now they're taking a deep breath to say, oh, okay, wow. I guess we're not getting that 20. And I mean, that still means we could get more than we currently have, but we're not getting an automatic 20 coming through. So now they're starting to think like, well, money might be tight if they're not going to do it for football.
Yeah, so it's interesting. A few things could be at play here. So when you talk about the women's scholarships offsetting the additional 20 in theory, right? Let's say the Big Ten does, just Michigan goes to 105. You're right. That would imply actually Michigan would have to add 21 scholarships, because they're actually at Michigan, there are more women students, and that's how they figure equity in Title IX. But while Title IX is not specified how to enforce it in the House settlement, one thing that's been presumed to be clear cut is one area that Title IX does apply is to how you divvy up the scholarships. And I think people understand that, right? So that's what you're talking about. So, yeah, the women's programs in the SEC, they still, maybe they're out of balance at some schools, who knows? But they made this decision. Now, the money, is it a disadvantage to the SEC not to have these extra 20 scholarships versus, say, the Big Ten, if they're competing against them? Maybe, maybe not. The coaches and the athletic departments might have said, look, we've got that covered anyway. I mean, what do you mean? Player 86 through 105 will cover with NIL. They're doing this today. They're doing this for roster spots in the gray areas above 85 today. Schools are having NIL opportunities through collectives or otherwise for those players. They're saying, we got you covered, Mom and Dad.
Let me stop you right there for a moment.
Yeah.
So, yes, NIL still exists. Everybody raises a certain amount of money to be spent for a particular group of student athletes for that academic year or athletic year, to be more precise. I would think that with that money, they would probably try to use that to pay more 1 to 85. Why do you think that those people, 86 to 105, are going to get taken care of when 1 through 85 could be taken care of more?
I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm just suggesting it could happen and happen off the books through NIL, where all these other considerations wouldn't come into play.
Right.
Look, we've got approximately $20 million to distribute as well. Okay, we're gonna, and there's no guidance on that, and there's suggestions on how to divvy it up, but the football team's going to get most of it. Maybe there's an imbalance with some of the other players to kind of make up for these scholarships to say we're going to have a healthy roster of 105 guys, and it's taken care of. But you don't get the scrutiny of Title IX. That's where people might go, look, what are you doing here? What are you playing some game here? Are you trying to avoid adding 40 scholarships, the 20 for the football team and the 20 for the women's team, by playing these games outside the books through collectives or through revenue sharing? Because that's when people are going to raise some eyebrows and go, what's going on here? So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And that the whole league came together, which does to me make sense. I think the conferences should come together with some kind of guidelines on both the scholarships and the revenue sharing. But from what I've heard so far, the Big Ten is not going to do that. I've heard no inclination that the Big Ten is going to do this kind of thing. If they were to do it, it would probably start with football and work backwards. But I haven't heard a thing, Steve. So this is, call it an opportunity, call it whatever you want. This is a chance for the Big Ten, certainly if there's a conference we measure ourselves against, to say, okay, we're going to do that too. It would be really interesting. It raises a bunch of questions. I was very surprised too. I thought it was a slam dunk that all football programs with a serious football teams in any conference, A, wouldn't do this, and B, would certainly do the 105. Maybe a Vanderbilt would say, okay, guys, we're going to keep her at 90 or 85 or right around there. Yeah. But we're not going to do this. But for them all to get together and agree, very interesting.
Well, apparently it just means more in the SEC, but maybe not in this situation.
And they're calling the other 20 people like walk-ons. And there is something to say about having walk-ons. And I think that and I feel that. But that's not what this is, right? That's not really what this is. They might be walk-ons, but that's not really what the spirit here. When we talk about preserving walk-ons and roster sizes and people with opportunities at schools, that's not what we're talking about here. Are these 20 people? Because right now there are probably 140 people on the Alabama football team. Okay. Those opportunities are shrinking. They're not getting bigger here. This isn't helping that. Okay?
Right.
Okay.
We talked about roster sizes last week, and do they really need to be that big?
Yeah.
The other thing is, anytime that I see a group or a collective of people make a decision, lately it seems like in college football, it's responded by a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Would any lawyer that sees a unified agreement call it collusion?
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. The question, though, is where lawyers get involved and people sue, is that someone was harmed. Someone had harm put upon them. Who is harmed here by this? I don't know that player 86 was harmed by this. We don't know that yet. Mm-hmm. What were they denied? Because they could go play for some other school and get a scholarship. There are other scholarships and other schools available.
Right.
Okay. How were they harmed? you might argue, if game is being played by the SEC to keep the scholarships down, to keep extra scholarships for the women, they could say, you're playing a game and avoiding Title IX by doing this game, and you're compensating those players other ways. You are denying scholarships for the women's programs by playing this game. That could be viewed as harm.
Or you're denying men. They could have gone to 105, but you chose not to fill it, and they should be able to fill it, and you've got enough money to do it. I'm just trying to picture myself as a lawyer, which I'm clearly not.
Yeah.
But these are the things that I'm kind of just seeing.
I don't know if you have a sympathetic audience there, though, for player 86. I just don't know. I think you have a better case to go. You screwed our softball team here, or you screwed gymnastics, which, by the way, I don't think is going to get screwed in this at the SEC. But anyway, okay.
Something that is being challenged is the long-established rules about taking in a JUCO player. I mean, ever since I was learning about college football 30 years ago, a JUCO player can come join your roster and you get 2 years of eligibility. That is now being challenged. Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia is suing the NCAA over its rules limiting the eligibility of former junior college players once they transfer to a Division I school. Pavia and his lawyers believe the NCAA's rules unjustifiably restrain athletes' abilities to earn money under the name, image, and likeness rules. And this goes to your answer earlier, Greg. How do you prove that somebody's being harmed? They're presenting that case.
That's right. That's that to me is in the fairway of justifiable harm. Okay, we're talking about football, I know, but that's how these things happen. So he's got a point, and by the way, he's got a bit of a name. I don't know how many people knew this guy's name before the season started, but this is the guy who beat Alabama. I'm putting it on his shoulders. I mean, he really did. So he's got a name. Lawyers say, we got something out there. It's kind of related, Steve, kind of related. It's less high profile, but there were lawsuits for similar reasons in the Canadian Hockey League. And what is this? This is a 60-team league of professional young hockey players.
There's 60 of them?
There's, I believe, 60 teams. Wow. I think there's 5 leagues in the CHL.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot. So if you sign with a CHL team, you get paid. It's not a lot of money, of course, but that has prevented you from playing college hockey if you wanted to make the jump.
Again, another thing, since we've been kids, learning about this stuff and being students ourselves, 18-year-old or 17-year-old hockey players had a choice. You can go to a university system and get your education and play the sport of hockey and then join the NHL if you're good enough. Or you can be paid right away, play in the minor leagues in Canada. And we've always seen the recruiting battles between a kid making a decision not only about what university he's going to, but whether I'm going to get paid or not.
Yes.
So this is just well established is what's been the norm.
Yes.
You choose to play minor league pro, or you choose to go to a school like the University of Michigan or anywhere else in the USA. But you had to make one decision or the other. And once you made that decision, that was it. There was no going back.
Yep.
I think this is great. I think this is great for everybody that you can make one choice and then change your mind later.
So if you pay attention to hockey at all, you know that now college hockey is a major breeding ground for NHL stars. It has not always been that case. Red Berenson played at Michigan and was an absolute strange case that he went to college and then had success in the NHL. That just didn't happen in the 60s.
Always the second choice.
Yes, it was always the second choice. And that's not the case anymore. Michigan's got 6, 7, 8 guys drafted, some of them very high, by the way, by teams on the roster. When they print the lineup sheet, it shows their hockey affiliation because they've been drafted. They're not getting paid yet. They make a choice. The teams talk to them, they talk, and they figure out when to jump. By the way, it's very frustrating for coaches, because you might lose your captain all of a sudden, right in April. He's gone. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is very interesting. I have a hunch that college hockey coaches, like ours at Michigan, has been watching this very closely, and they have very, very close attention to what's going on with the CHL. This will increase the pool of highly talented players who are eligible to play college hockey. And The level of college hockey is about to go up because you will have players who do indeed jump because this is a path to the NHL. Out of Yost Ice Arena, you have some of the best hockey players in the NHL right now played at Michigan and other teams that we play, and teams out east, North Dakota. All of these schools have put top-notch international hockey players into the league.
And what's going to be harder for these college hockey teams is they got to have a scouting service. It's one thing to look at the prep players and then they decide whether they're going to go in the university system in the U.S. or play professionally in the CHL. And then once that decision is made, everyone in that filing cabinet now goes into the vertical garbage, the cylinder. And now they're going to keep looking at them throughout their CHL careers and keep looking at them. And when you say 60-some teams with a roster of, 25 players? I mean, that's 1,500 individuals.
That's a lot of people. Yeah, so the best coaches have already either had a service or created their own ways to evaluate these players. And it'll be really, really interesting to see where this goes, Steve. We're not going to talk politics, but I'll tell you, elections have consequences and affect college athletics from the Supreme Court on down, right? The Supreme Court is the one who effectively said 9-0, the NCAA, you're out of bounds, preventing these people from making more money. That's where NIL came from. The judges who are presiding over all these cases are appointed. Okay, then you talk about Congress. We have what looks to be a full, at the time we're recording this, the House hasn't been settled yet, but it looks like it's also going to go Republican. The Republican Party and the leaders in the Republican Party have been more, say, friendly to the NCAA's vision of creating an antitrust exemption from the Senate, and some leaders in the House have already said, we kind of back the NCAA and want to give them a chance and give them some legal protection here. So the likelihood of some kind of actual Congress action to protect the NCAA is more likely. I don't know if it's still Congress, Steve. We're still talking about Congress. They have other things to worry about. But people like Ted Cruz and Tommy Tuberville, former coach, these people have been outspoken that they want to go out and protect the NCAA. Now they're going to have the straight line to do it. So we will see. Very interesting stuff, man.
More on that coming up. Speaking of more, we have a lot more to talk about, but it's probably time for halftime. And when we come back, we're going to look around the Big Ten and the nation and some interesting stories coming up.
It's Nick Hopwood, CFP and founder of Peak Wealth Management. Learn how to retire with peak confidence at peakwm.com. A lot of people don't realize we have a special arrangement with the University 401, 403, 457 retirement plan. If you're a university employee or even a former university employee, you can add us as your advisor to your account. And my bet is that we can help you optimize your situation, especially when it comes to taking advantage of the mega backdoor Roth option with the 457. If you're highly compensated, I can show you a way to contribute over $60,000 per year to the university plan.
So speaking of Nick, did you hear that Nick interviewed Indeed? I teased this last time, and it happened. He interviewed Silas Swords and Olivia Olson from the women's basketball team, and Nick did a great job on his podcast and talked about their background. Swords talked about making the Olympic team as a 17-year-old for Canada and going up against WNBA All-Stars and all this stuff in the Olympics.
Playing people twice her age.
Yeah, Olivia Olson talked about some of her side hustles in Minnesota where she had a lawn. You hear about the kid in your neighborhood who had the lawn mowing business. She did that in Minnesota, during COVID. I think she called it Liv's Lawns, and had customers and had side hustles. It was really cool. And I'm telling you, you probably, if you're listening to this, maybe you've heard Sila's name, but she's the one. She scored 27 points against South Carolina in the opener in Vegas. These two are going to be fun to watch. And I'm telling you, man, Michigan women's basketball is on the rise. And so props to Nick for getting the interview and doing that. And it was really cool. And, of course, he tied it to, hey, are you investing any of this money? That kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. Sure. So props to Nick for that. Check it out on his podcast.
Sila, by the way, Big Ten Freshman of the Week.
Absolutely, 100%.
And
she's a killer.
I love her hustle. I love hustle players. I mean, she was just breaking to the basket, beating her person who was ever defending her, and coming out of nowhere to snatch rebounds.
Fearless.
at some point she's going to make people scouting reports, and they're going to probably box her out a little bit better than what they have, from the first part of the season when you're still trying to figure things out. But
oh yeah, we talk about 5 stars in recruit. These both were 5-star recruits coming out of high school. Olsen, Iowa wanted Olsen, and so she talked about meeting Kate and Clark, and they have a good relationship and all that. But it wasn't her vibe, and they both came to Michigan, and they both want to win a championship. It's going to be fun to follow. That's all I can say, Steve. What else about the Big Ten, man? We had a few things. We've got the playoff committee coming up. We got 4 teams that right now, if the season ended, are in the playoff. I mean, unquestionably. Yeah.
4 best teams in the Big Ten won last week, and only Indiana was challenged during the entire weekend. This week, more of the same. IU has a week to prepare for their showdown with Ohio State, but the Buckeyes have a week off, even though they are playing Northwestern. Oregon has to go to Madison. That's a game people will make a big deal out of that really probably doesn't need to be. I think the question about Oregon is, are they really the number 1 team in the nation? And if they're not, who is? Because this is a college football year where there does not appear to be a dominant number 1.
No, I just don't feel like we have that one standout team. Absolutely. 100%.
No. So it's either going to be Oregon or a team with 1 loss that's probably going to win the national championship, unless you want to include Indiana in this, that Indiana just goes all the way undefeated. I'm not willing to go there.
And I sent you a tweet, Steve, about your next 2 teams that you're going to talk about that we talked about last time, that they ranked the Mattis fan bases, and at the top of the list were your 2 favorite teams.
Yes.
Yes.
The one game I am interested in the Big Ten this weekend, Nebraska at USC, the irresistible choke versus the inevitable blown lead.
How do we bet this? Go ahead.
I don't know. Matt Rule, the coach of Nebraska, fired his offensive coordinator and hired former West Virginia and Houston head coach Dana Holgorsen to be his OC. Nebraska started the season 5-1, and it seemed inevitable that they would be bowl eligible for the first time since 2016. Then there were 3 straight losses. And then when you have a schedule with Wisconsin and Iowa still coming up, it's no longer a guarantee anymore, Greg. This, to me, is a complete sign of desperation, but I think it's a good move. Dana Holgorsen is known for being an offensive coach. Nebraska is struggling offensively. Dylan Raiola is questionable for this game against USC with a bad back. They have 3 opportunities to win 1 game. Greg, could you imagine a Michigan fan base that had not been to a bowl game or eligible for a bowl game for 8 straight seasons? You start 5-1. You're making your plans. You're doing the Nick thing where you're saving up your budget to go to play down south in Florida or California. It's going to be a great bowl trip. Then you lose 3 straight games. You just have to win 1, but the schedule is not exactly in their favor.
No.
And I'm grinning.
No.
I'm loving it.
This is our season. After the Northwestern game, which we need to get bowl eligible, 3:30, by the way, Steve.
Yes.
After that, this is our season, is watching other people suffer. So we're going to be watching close. Yeah, they probably needed to do something. We'll be watching.
I'm not forgiving Nebraska. Just
right.
Not. It's been 27 years, and I'm not forgiving them.
We can't quit them. Okay, let's go. What else around the nation?
All right, Lane Kiffin finally breaks through.
Yep.
1-5 against Alabama and Georgia now. Alabama essentially eliminating LSU. Is there a ceiling for Brian Kelly in Baton Rouge? This is his 3rd year. He's not going to win more than 9 games. Brian Kelly left Notre Dame to have a better chance at winning a national championship. And the irony is that Notre Dame is likely to be in the playoffs. And for the 3rd straight year, Brian Kelly can't get them in.
Yeah, and of course, some of you are like, good. Does this help us with Bryce Underwood?
Yeah.
If he loses Bryce Underwood, I don't think he's going to get fired this year. But, Steve, if they stumble at the beginning of next year and they lose Bryce Underwood, I think he is in trouble.
It's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
So a lot of money in New Orleans and down south, but are they playing with money that they actually really don't have? That is a question mark. Meanwhile, Miami finally loses, and they lose to Georgia Tech. Miami was in 3 really, really close games, come from behind victories. Now they have left the ranks of the unbeaten. There's only 4 left. The playoff committee has probably made their selections public before you hear this pod. This weekend's coming games. Tennessee is at Georgia as the SEC power teams sort of sort themselves out. 2 losses in the SEC doesn't eliminate you, but it gives Big Ten teams the possibility to host first-round games.
Great point. I might be back in Bloomington if Indiana can, because look, I mean, they got to play Ohio State.
Yep.
And then they have their annual rivalry game at home against Purdue. So they should probably take care of Purdue, wouldn't you think?
Yes, that's an automatic.
So then the question is, like, who's in the Big Ten championship game, all that stuff. But it's looking like, I assume through the tiebreakers, that it's going to be Oregon and Ohio State.
Right.
But so Indiana will have merely the one loss. You would think they would get a home game.
Yeah, if Oregon wins out, it's nothing even to talk about because the second Big Ten team would be Ohio State for beating both Penn State and IU.
Yeah.
Now, the question is...
Short of Michigan. Go ahead.
The debate around the nation would be, Indiana finally plays a ranked team in Ohio State. How did they lose the game? If they win the game, there's no debate.
Yeah.
If they lose the game, it's how did you lose?
Sure.
Did you compete or did you completely fall apart? And if they fall apart, well, then the SEC is going to cry. So we got a log jam of 5-6 teams that are really clearly good enough to be in the 12-team playoff. Give us all a berth. That's what you'll hear out of the Southeast Conference.
I think Indiana, with one loss, even if they get blown out at Ohio State, is going to be all right. But we'll see.
Hey, Kirby Smart called the Pope stupid on Monday.
Okay.
Not the Pope, but Bulldogs backup safety Jake Pope, stupid for being filmed celebrating with Ole Miss fans following their loss. Turns out one of his best friends is a student at Ole Miss, and Pope was just trying to be happy for him. This might be a good thing to talk about to some of your students in your classes that happen to be student athletes. Because, Greg, as a reminder for all the kids out there, when you're on a team and whether you play or don't play, like backup safety Jake Pope, after a loss, you must appear devastated.
Yes.
You must appear angry, but not angry enough to do any bodily harm to someone or your own equipment.
Right.
It's an underrated fine line to be devastated but respectful.
Well, absolutely. Like, let's say you didn't tell your spouse that you voted for Trump and you were scared to say that, Steve. You have to act devastated that Trump won, or vice versa, of course. But we're talking about the guy who won. Yes, you have to know how to do this. Come on. All right. What else, Steve? Do we have any things only we care about? Is this possible? Did we run out of things?
No.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
We will never run out of
There's
things.
a long list. Can I add one?
You start first.
Hey, memo to Fairfield by Marriott, who has somehow decided that the proper way to put light switches is outside the room you're entering. So you enter a bathroom. Usually the lights are in the bathroom, correct?
Right.
In the room you enter.
Yes.
No. We're going to put them outside the room. And the room that you enter before the bathroom, also, the light is outside the room. So in the darkness, as you're fumbling around, you have to rethink how electricity works and how our standards are. You have to go back to where you were before and flip the light switch on. And it's almost like a maze where you're just consecutively like turning on the lights to enter the room before you enter. That's how they decided to set up. And I have to relearn this every time I'm on one of these lower-end Marriott properties.
At least they don't do it in the hallway. But the thing about putting light fixtures outside the bathroom is if you're not trying to wake up your significant other and blind them to death, you're trying to be quiet, be respectful so that your spouse can sleep. If you have to turn the light on from outside the room, you can't close the door to turn on the light.
Correct. There's lots of problems with it, Steve. I had to rethink all this, and now I'm all confused. I don't know what I'm doing.
So now you turn on the light. Everybody is blinded. She wakes up. You go in. You quickly close the door, and in your quickness in the middle of the night, the door probably slams. The sliding door slams or something like that. Now she's startled. And then whether it's a 10-second trip or a 10-minute trip, when you come back out, you have to open the door and the floodlight comes through the room again.
Yes, it's a disaster. And I blame this for how Michigan ended up in the game. It was horrible, Steve. What else, Steve? What is there a sports one we have here?
Yes.
Yes, good.
Utah has a 5-game losing streak.
Yeah.
Now, on paper, the game against BYU was a 3-touchdown game for BYU to remain undefeated. But it's a rivalry game. It's called the Holy War, and the Utes had this game won. And they thought that they won the game when they got a 4th down sack of BYU's quarterback, only to be told that there was defensive holding. I mean, the fans were ready to rush the field, and there was a flag on the play. Everybody had to go back. There was defensive holding, automatic 1st down. BYU marches down the field in the remaining minute and a half or whatever it took and hits the game-winning kick. And their AD breaks into the post-game presser and acts like a fan who got his lunch money stolen.
This game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. Very disappointed. I will talk to the commissioner. This was not fair to our team. I'm disgusted by the professionalism of the officiating crew tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. He says thank you.
Speaking of professionalism.
That's the athletic director.
That
wasn't
perfect.
just a dude.
That is the AD, Mark Harlan, no relation to Carmen Harlan, going off on the Big 12.
That wasn't a post-game call-in to the radio station. That was the athletic director.
Who invaded the post-game press conference. He said, I got to get my 2 cents in here. Yeah, he said he was going to talk to the Big 12 commissioner. Yeah, he had to talk all right.
Yeah, he sure
With
did.
Brett Yormark. But I think Yormark probably did most of the talking, issuing a $40,000 fine and a written statement of apology by the Utah AD after all of this. I'm not going to read that. But that $40,000 fine, that's about 5% of his salary this year, though I'm sure he riled up the fan base enough that the Ute Collective could have a fundraiser and raise that money for him. But I got to imagine, Greg, that this guy will not be replacing Ward Manuel as the next chair of the CFP selection committee.
No, because that sounded like a dude, and he's like, I want to say something, but he didn't clearly have it planned out what he was going to say. And again, it kind of sounded like drive time caller after the game, and I'm mad, and I'm not going to take it.
He sounded like Ira's worst nightmare.
Unbelievable.
Love it. The AD at Utah, speaking out, have you ever heard or remember a situation where an AD just come right out and basically sound like a fan?
No, that's brutal, unprofessional. I don't know. Maybe they embrace it. Utah has a funny fan base. Like I've spent some time in Salt Lake City. I went to Jim Harbaugh's first game out there. They are incredibly prideful about their team, and so is BYU. And I know that's a huge rivalry. Very interesting. I am curious what the Utah fans think. Yeah, he stuck up for us. He's like one of us. Or is it, this is our AD? I don't know.
No, I think they're raising money to pay the fine for him. That's what I'm guessing, but I have a feeling the story isn't exactly over yet.
Brutal. Maybe they can fix Cam Rising finally. He was, on every injured reserve list. I know he's out for the season now, but boy, how the mighty have fallen, Steve.
No, speaking of the mighty have fallen, at least Michigan football gets a week off to figure things out against a Northwestern team that is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. Thank goodness for that. They need the bowl, not only for the prestige, but for the 15 practices for all of these guys for the future, because Michigan's losing a lot of people for next season, and their backups haven't even played yet.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some holes. Need those practices, need the prestige of getting to a bowl game. It's sort of like hitting a hole in one and taking 8 on the next one. You don't want to do that. So
That's
be bowl
right.
eligible, Michigan. Beat
No,
Northwestern.
and I hit my hunches, Steve. The players definitely want to win this game. They want to go out at home. This has been an incredible run. Let's wrap it up with a win at home. But until they sort out this playoff nonsense, Steve, I believe we are still the reigning national champions. Am I right?
Go blue, Greg.
Go blue.